Welcome to the Movies of the Damn podcast. My name is Kyle Grant, and I'm sitting here with my friend and published horror author John Hunt. If you enjoy what you hear here today, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out our Facebook page, and follow us on both Instagram and Twitter at Damn Movies. Email us any questions, comments, and suggestions to moviesofthedamned@gmail.com. For further details on John's published works, please visit his blog, johnhuntfiction.wordpress.com. Today, we'll be discussing Brett Ratner's 2002 psychological horror, Red Dragon. This film is a prequel to The Silence of the Lambs and opens with FBI agent Will Graham catching Hannibal Lecter, but not before being severely injured and then stepping away from the FBI. Will, though, is forced back to work to help catch a new serial killer, the Tooth Fairy, and is forced to consult with Lecter for guidance. Ultimately, Will cracks the case, but not before the Tooth Fairy hunts him down and almost kills his family. The film ends just as Clarice shows up to visit Lecter. John, opening thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, so when the first Silence of the Lambs came out, well, when the Silence of the Lambs came out, I was obviously fascinated, thought it was great. I read the books, and I was a huge fan. So when anything else came out about it, I was kind of all over it, right? So I looked at, because this is kind of a remake of a movie called Manhunter, right? Because it was based on the Red Dragon novel, but it was done quite a few years before this, and it had a different Hannibal Lecter actor in it, same character though, had the Tooth Fairy in it, and it had the Will Graham character in it, like in the Florida, I've seen this before, but then when I started watching this one and I remembered who was in it, like you have Ed Norton, you have Ralph Fiennes, who's awesome. You have Harvey Keitel, who's Jack Crawford. Like I was like, oh yeah, I forgot all these awesome people. And of course, there's Hannibal Lecter himself, right? So it's it was good. I was happy to see all those cast of characters in it. But then some things. Well, as I kept watching it, it was just like, okay, well, some things kind of bothered me about it. What about you? What were your opening thoughts?
Well, I just first of all, I just want to say that it's really interesting that you brought up Manhunter because not a lot of people even know about that film. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was kind of the original for this series, but it's really disregarded because kind of when they did the Silence of the Lambs movie, it was like a full reboot of the series.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, this Red Dragon is kind of like a redo of that, and everything since Silence of the Lambs has kind of been in the same universe, whereas Manhunter was its own independent universe. They kind of, I don't know if they didn't like the way they was going or they just wanted to start fresh, but nonetheless, it's just interesting that you brought that one up. This movie, Red Dragon,
Mm-hmm.
this is one that I saw in theaters back in 2002. So 18 years ago now, which when I think of that, I'm like, oh my gosh,
I know,
time
that's
flies.
crazy. That's so crazy.
But John, I hadn't seen this movie since then,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of wild to think about because it has Edward Norton in it, who's one of my favorite actors, if not
Absolutely.
my favorite actor,
He's great. Yeah.
number one. So it's just like I'm like, how did I never watch this again? Because I remembered enjoying it in theaters. But the cool thing that I found with this, and maybe it's just a sign of me getting old, is me watching it 18 years later.
Yeah.
I kind of forgot everything that happened in the movie. So even though I had seen it, it was almost as if I was watching it fresh again. Maybe that was because as well that I didn't read the book, but just for some reason I kind of forgot all the twists and turns, and it was just an enjoyable movie watching experience for me again, which was you don't always get that after seeing something a second time.
Oh, for sure. And I had forgotten Ed Norton was in it. I know I saw I remember the plot because I've seen it and I've read it and all that type of stuff, so I knew what it was about. But I'd forgotten Ed Norton was in it, and like you said, like he's one of my favorite actors. He's phenomenal actually. I like watching him. I like in almost any role that he plays, he knocks it out of the park. So I was very happy to see him in it. Um, and so just to have that again and watch that again, I was quite happy. But for me, it almost it was almost like the exact same plot as Silence of the Lambs. They just changed the characters. So I was just like, okay, well, I saw this already, so cool, you know?
Yeah, no, and I do hear what you're saying. I guess I don't know. Well, let's start at the beginning, and we'll kind of work our way
Yeah.
through, and you can kind of go with more what your issues were, because now that you mentioned, I kind of see what you're saying. Like, there's a killer they have to catch, and they need Hannibal Lecter's help finding the killer, and this and that. But for some reason, as I was watching it, those connections didn't hit in my brain. But starting from the opening scene, I love this opening scene
Mm-hmm.
because it's so rare that you get these scenes where, as the audience, you know exactly what's happening, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the characters doesn't. And I
Yes.
just love the tension that was built through the fact that, like, you're almost sitting there on your couch screaming. It's like, Edward Norton, like, be careful. This is Hannibal Lecter. He's gonna kill you. But like Norton is just clueless. And I just thought this scene was so well written. It was kind of like a slow burn, but you knew it was gonna hit its climax.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just a fantastic start to the movie.
Yeah, and I really like that opening scene too. It's just because just the way they interacted with each other was very interesting because you could see Hannibal probing Will to say like this guy knows, but he's not doesn't know that he knows yet, right? So he's like probing to see how far along Will was in deciding who, like realizing who Hannibal really was. So I
Yeah,
thought that
and I
was
think that he really liked Will.
yeah for sure he does. He admired Will. He saw in him. Um, Well, and they address this later, right? So he liked Will because Will was like him, just not a killer, right? So
Yeah.
Will could empathize with other killers and could see their motives and why they did the things that they did. And so Hannibal liked that about him. It's just he just wasn't that killer, you know?
And you're right, he was probing him because I don't think that like Hannibal wanted to kill him because he
No.
liked him so much. And so he was just like making like 100% sure that he had to kill him before he did. And I just thought that was so clever and so cool.
And also, like, I don't know if it was exactly. I think it was a combination of he actually liked Will Graham, but he also liked the game, right? So here he is. He's the therapist for the guy who's trying to find him. That would play right up with Lecter's character. Like, this is amazing. This is
Yeah,
so
it
good.
was almost like
Yeah.
A Dexter type thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where Dexter's like supposed to be on the good guy's side, but he's the one committing the murders. It's a similar type of thing.
Well, this is. All I mean is that Hannibal would like the game between Will and Graham, right? So it's like it's kind of ironic. Like he's trying to help the person with their mental health. Meanwhile, he knows Will is damaged, and meanwhile, he also knows Will is trying to find him. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if he helps Will too much, then it might help Will find him. So it's like the Hannibal character would love that game. He would think, okay, this is great. I'm way smarter than anyone I ever know, so I'll be able to do this for as long as I want, and it's amusing. So I think, and he also liked Will. I think there was a combination of those two factors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, 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 you're right. And cool scene. It ultimately ends up, as I said, hitting his climax where
Mm-hmm.
Lecter attacks him, but not before Will kind of is able to defend himself, and Lecter ultimately gets captured,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of leads us into that opening credit sequence, which I love when films and filmmakers use the opening credits for something useful. And I
Yeah.
loved how it kind of throughout the opening credits, instead of just having like landscape and names rolling, it had all these like newspaper clippings and articles kind of showing like
Yep.
um, Edward Norton recovering in the hospital and Hannibal Lecter on trial and him
Mm-hmm.
ultimately being convicted. I just thought that was it made the transition to the point where Will was now kind of had taken a step back from the FBI and Hannibal Lecter was now in prison. Just it made that transition so much smoother and so much quicker, and no time needed to be wasted on that
Yeah. I
because
mean,
ultimately we knew that Hannibal Lecter was being convicted. We knew that he was going to be in jail because this was a prequel.
yeah, for sure. And but also, like we talked about this, it's just a good way to do it. We talked about it in The Quiet Place, right? They did the same thing. So
Yes, that's right. That's right.
yeah, so it's a good way to do it, right? So you kill two birds with one stone. You get the credits rolling, and people are doing that, but it's also the audience is still interested, whereas normally you're not interested in the credits. So then,
Yeah.
because now you're being filled with all the story where you don't have to do scenes or dialogue, you just have these clippings showing up, and the clippings are linear, so they're showing a progression through time to bring you up to the present. So it's just yeah, it's a really useful tool.
And I had to laugh at some of the headlines too because it's like living in the time we are now where with these sensational headlines, it's like um I'm sure maybe 2002 they were ridiculous, but like now it's like, yeah, Hannibal the cannibal and all this ridiculous. I could so see that being in one of the newspapers of today or like a top a website or something like that. So it just made me chuckle a little bit. Um, but then it kind of we the audience gets introduced about this new serial killer that's kind of hit the street, and
Hmm.
that's how Will ends up getting pulled back into the game because, as you kind of already touched on, John, he is a genius. He's probably as close to as smart a person as Hannibal Lecter is.
Yeah, and he's more intuitive, right? So whereas Hannibal Lecter would be able to point to the reasons why exactly a person is the way they are, and would be able to give you a whole synopsis of that person just upon what they're wearing, or even right. Where
Hmm.
Will would be able to look at it and go, okay, well, uh, I can see why this person is doing it because of these factors, right? So it's like almost reverse of Hannibal, but it's very intuitive and it's very emotional impact on him, which is why he doesn't like to be inside, like to do it.
Yeah, no, and you're right. The intuitive thing is really clever, and I like the way that that was presented to the audience when you kind of see Will going to the murder scene, the family's house by himself, and kind of like going through the different rooms and talking to himself, like because he's audio recording what he's saying, and just kind of it's almost like they are able to show you inside his mind as he's
Yep.
kind of trying to figure things out, and you're almost kind of figuring things out and cracking the case with him, which is it's just a very clever way again of presenting things to the audience.
For sure, it's a great tool to bring you inside. One, it draws you closer to the main character, so you actually care what happens to him, and two, it allows you to see the horrendous acts through the main character's eyes. So now you're angry at the villain, or you're not really angry at the villain, but you want the villain to be caught. So it's like a double. It's just a useful tool. I keep saying tool, but it's just a useful way to get the audience very involved early on.
And now, just to rewind for a second, and I'll start off by saying I personally didn't have a problem with this because I thought they explained it very well, and I felt that Edward Norton's character Will would do this. But how did you feel about Will's decision to get back into the FBI, so to speak, after everything that had happened to him? Because it was obvious that he had taken quite a step away, and his family kind of didn't really want him to get back into the game.
Well, I think it's one of those things where he took a step away because his family wanted him to.
Yeah.
This is something that he loves to do, and that's why Hannibal said that they were so similar. He loves the hunt. He loves to find these people. He may try to distance himself from it and say, I'm doing it for the betterment of society or for whatever. But like, no, he's engaged. He enjoys it on some subconscious level. He feels real value in what he's doing,
Oh
and
yeah, because he couldn't let he said he couldn't let another family die. So he alluded to something like that.
well, that's just a way to sell it to his family. But I think it was more the way that I see the Will character. It's more that he loves to do this, and it's like saying if something that you love to do, like say you like when you're in the midst of your university wrestling, like that's something that you love to do, and you were really into it, and all that type of stuff. And if your partner at the time said you need to quit wrestling, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it would be really rough on you, right? So
Hmm.
I think that's it's more akin aligned to those. Like Will loves this, even though it caused him a lot of damage and hurt. It's still one of those things where it's like um, he realizes it's dangerous. He realizes it's emotionally dangerous. He realizes it's psychologically dangerous, but he loves it and he wants to get back in.
Interesting. No, and that makes sense. And obviously, ultimately, he does get in, whether it's just because he loves the chase or he's looking to prevent another murder from happening. But he gets back in and he starts that real thorough investigation. And I just thought it was so clever that ultimately they were forced to include Hannibal again because they were kind of at that dead end and they needed that help, that guidance from him. And it's just so interesting to see that even though he had done these heinous things, it was almost as if the FBI still respected that intellect and knew that they needed him.
Well, here's the thing. This is what I find interesting about this whole universe in itself. Um, Hannibal is the villain but he's also the star attraction.
Yeah,
There is no series without Hannibal, right? So he's like the Darth Vader of this whole universe, right? Like you need him, right? Whereas there's no the heroes are actually interchangeable. So you went from Will Graham, you went to Clarice, and then like later on, it just the things the the main characters are the good guys. I'd say they're not as essential as Hannibal is. Hannibal is the evil that they all kind of revolve around, right? So
yeah, and
I think
they need him.
yeah, well they need him in the sense that um, without him, these films would not be interesting,
Yeah, I know
right?
you're absolutely right.
So that's the reason why they need him. So, but once again, it's like Silence of the Lambs was so good. So for so many reasons, and the reasons why we talked about it, but it was, I think it's more of a more of a refined version of Red Dragon, right? So you brought in the naive Clarice Starling, whereas Will Graham's not naive by any means, right? But it's the same tactic as in Silence, right? So it's like Will Graham goes to see. They realize they need Hannibal Lecter's insight into this, right? Which they really don't when you're considering who Will Graham is. He was able to intuit all these things. He doesn't need Hannibal, but whatever. They think Hannibal would be useful in this investigation, so he goes to see Hannibal. And what does he do to try to get Hannibal to help out? You know, get get some more privileges added, just like Clarice did in Silence of the Lambs, right? You'll be able to have this and that, and some type of leverage that Hannibal would be interested in. It's the exact same scenario once again. And then at the same time, it's like Hannibal um, was trying to manipulate a different turn of events when he was trying to like so like in Silence where he's manipulating the turn of events so he could escape, and this one he was manipulating the turn of events so the Tooth Fairy would go after Will Graham. There's like so many. It's almost the exact same pattern in my mind. And then you have the killer who is trying to evolve into be someone else, right? So in the Red Dragon, he was trying to be a dragon, right? He think he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
he's evolving. He's trying to be something he isn't, right? In Silence of the Lambs, the killer was trying to make himself a suit to become a woman. So it's it's a whole transformation, right? What goes with the remember in Silence, it was like they found that bug, the Death Head's moth, in the one person's throat.
Yeah, yeah.
That was supposed to represent transformation and change. You come out of the cocoon, the chrysalis, and now you're someone new. They used both the both symbolisms in both movie, right? So one's trying to transform from a weak, scared little boy into this powerful dragon. The other one's trying to transform from a man into a woman because that's who he wanted to be, right? So it's like almost the same, almost even the same type of villain. So I was just like, okay. So
And that's so right. Like you're bang on. But it's funny that it never crossed my mind as I was watching this movie. But
mm,
you're right. It literally is the same setup, and almost all aspects are the same as you just described. But for some reason, it didn't bother me, and I guess that's because the formula is so good.
well, like I said, I think the Silence of the Lambs I thought was better, obviously, but it was more, and but like I said, because I think it was refined, right? So I think what made Silence of the Lambs better is actually Clarice Starling, right? And then you also have I forgot to mention this as well, but in both films, Jack Crawford was manipulating people from behind the scenes. He was getting Will back into doing this, even though he knew it was against Will's good, like it would be good for Will to do it, but he think he needed Will, so he manipulated Will through guilt and whatever to get him to do this. And then in Silence of the Lambs, he got Clarice to do it, and for the purposes of trying to manipulate Hannibal, meanwhile knowing Hannibal will be the one manipulating Clarice. So it's just that same formula once again, right? So it's just there's a lot of that going on in this. But I just think Silence of the Lambs was just a much more refined version, and Clarice made that film. Not to say that Will Graham wasn't a great character, because he's a great character, and Ed Norton knocked it out of the park. But I think Clarice was a much more interesting character in the way that she interacted with Hannibal.
And fair enough. I can't necessarily argue that. And even if she is a little bit of a superior character and Silence is a little bit more refined, it still didn't mean that there weren't some great sequences in this movie.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
one that pops up to me besides that opening scene, which I absolutely loved, is how good was that sequence when they had Lecter out of his cell and they kind of discovered the note in the toilet paper,
Hmm.
and they knew they kind of the clock was ticking and they needed to get to the note and decode it and look at it and get forensics from it without Lecter knowing that they knew.
Hmm.
Like just a very cool, very interesting scene that again had a lot of tension to it as well because you knew how smart Lecter was.
Yes, and that Lecter would pick up on what they're trying to do
Yeah,
with
but
very.
he ultimately didn't.
Um, I don't think so. I think in that one sequence where he saw the one person leaving his cell who wasn't a regular character put something in his pocket, he knew something was up because they did the whole camera thing where they shifted to his eyes and then the guy put this thing in his hand in his pocket after leaving the cell and then Hannibal looked at that and then you like so he I think he knew something was up.
Oh, really? Okay, because I interpreted it as that they did it perfectly by the skin of their teeth. But perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe I need to rewatch that.
Perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe I need to watch it.
Yeah.
To me it looked like Hannibal knew though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and interesting, but still, it was a cool sequence. And again, there was a couple good jump scares in this movie. When Hannibal was kind of getting his exercise, and he
Hmm.
kind of lunged at Will, but like not even to attack Will, but just to scare him. Like
Hmm.
it scared me as the viewer.
Yeah.
Uh, like a great spot there. My big question for you though, what did you think of the twist at the end? By the twist, the fact that the Tooth Fairy was actually still alive.
Um. Once again, we talked about this in other movies. Like they didn't show him doing it. And this is a gory movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I was like, but you know, it's hard to say. It's one of those things with hindsight, right? Like I said, I read the books. I saw Manhunter. I saw this before. So, um, as far as twists go, like once the movie doesn't end when the guy's dead, there's something more coming, right? So then they go back to Florida with Will, and I'm like, okay, well, there's something more coming. There's no way. Um, and they didn't show anything about how Hannibal escaped, so it couldn't have been him. So, you know what I mean? To me, it's a fairly obvious thing. But
I guess for me, I wasn't looking at where we were in the movie and how much time was left. So I just assumed like when the big fire scene happened, oh, the credits are about to roll here. But
mm-hmm.
then you're right, as it keeps going, then you kind of get your back up a little bit and you're like, something must be going on here. But I personally like again, and it's just so funny. I'd already seen this movie, but I didn't remember that and I didn't see it coming the second time. I can't tell you where my head was at in the first one, but this second time it caught me off guard at least.
Yeah, you know, like things with time and distance, right? You forget some things. Like I forgot Ed Norton was in it, and like he's my favorite.
Yeah.
So, you know, we all
Hmm.
forget things for like that for sure, right?
But then I just love the end sequence, John, with Clarice showing up just as the movie ends. So like this flows almost perfectly, kind of part way into Silence of the Lambs.
Oh yeah, I like that too. I thought it was really well done. Um,
Yeah, so it was almost like it wasn't just straight prequel. There was a little bit of overlap almost.
yeah, so yeah, and I think this is a very interesting universe. Like you know, they had a TV series on it, right? That was based upon Will Graham and all that type of stuff, and Lawrence Fishburne played Jack Crawford, which I thought was awesome. But they went a little too far, like they do in TV series, right? So, but like this is
And there was another prequel as well,
um,
Hannibal Rising.
yes. So there's that one, and then there's one after it called after the Silence of the Lambs called Hannibal, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a few films in this universe. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
Silence of the Lambs came out first, and then they kind of did the sequel, Hannibal, and then this one, The Red Dragon, was the third installment in the series. But something I wanted to ask you, and I actually didn't look this up, but I thought you might know because you love your book so much. The novels, were they released in that same order, where it went Silence of the Lambs,
No,
then Hannibal, and then Red Dragon, or,
it
or
was it was
what order?
it was Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal,
Oh, interesting.
and
So it
then
went in chronological order.
Hannibal Rising.
Oh, and then the original prequel after that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, very cool. No, I had no clue about that. Um, one thing that I was really interested in, and I kind of like to do this whenever we're reviewing a movie in a on a series, so to speak, is to look at how this movie compares to its predecessors as far as the critics go. So looking at Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score on this one was about 68,
Mm-hmm.
which again is a thumbs up, not an overwhelming thumbs up, but it's certified fresh. You look at the original Silence of the Lambs though, and that one knocked it apart, 96. So everyone agrees with you. It's a more refined, better movie. But then when you look at Hannibal, so the sequel to Silence, that we haven't talked about on this podcast, but it got trashed. It was sitting there with 39.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought it was very interesting that they kept making this series, even though the second one in the series was so poorly reviewed. So I just thought it was interesting they decided, no, we'll give this one more try, and they were able to significantly improve it from the second one, if that makes sense to you.
Well, yeah, it's always it always comes back to what's who's paying the bills, the critics or the audience,
Yeah,
right? So when Hannibal came out, uh, the movies were flooded, right? Because Silence of the Lambs was amazing, so everyone
yeah,
wanted to see it. And once again, Hannibal is the star. He's the most interesting character out of the whole series. So people always wanted to know what happened to him afterwards, right? Like when he was walking away, and like at the end of Silence of the Lambs, people were like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Like people wonder about that, so they provided that, and a lot of people went. So it's like, okay, well, we could probably do better if we put some more time into it, or do whatever the case may be. They're just trying to make money, and Hannibal is such a good character that I don't begrudge them trying to do that. I think it's I wanted to know more about him. Like I didn't see it in the theaters, but I did see Hannibal when it was on one of the services on TV here.
And did you read the book as well?
Uh, yes, I did. So I read all of them actually. I was
Because that
trying
was
to.
going to be my next question for you. Like if Hannibal the book was well done, or if it wasn't to the same level and kind of you didn't like it as much, kind of like the movie.
Well, I like Silence of the Lambs. That Hannibal the best, right? So like you're just saying how he lunged at Will Graham and Red Dragon or whatever.
Yeah.
To me, that's not what Hannibal would do, right? He's not a lunger. He's not something. He's very refined. He would think that's rude. You know what I mean? So
Oh,
for me, I thought that was out of character for him. It was like more of like it's what a high school bully would do, right? The jock walks by the nerd and flinches at him. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, and the nerd hits his own head on the locker or something like
Right?
that.
You know what I mean? So to me it didn't seem like Hannibal at all. And like in especially from Silence of the Lambs, like he made a big deal of what when that guy was very rude to Clarice, right?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
And he talked him into killing himself, that type of thing, right? So it's just like, I didn't like that. I don't think that was necessary. It's more like I don't think the writers. I don't want to talk about the writers like that, but I don't think they actually understood where how Hannibal was presented earlier, or how Thomas Harris presented Hannibal in the books. So I like the Thomas Harris Hannibal. Sometimes that gets lost in the translation with the movies, but I would say Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon was wonderfully written. Silence of the Lambs was wonderfully written. And I enjoyed Hannibal and Hannibal Rising, but I think at that point, oversaturation would have been like, okay, I get it. Hannibal's really smart. I
Yeah,
get
been
it.
there, done that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So, but still, Thomas Harris, great author, and his work was really, really well done as far as I'm concerned. But I think, like I said, overexposure to the character.
Very interesting. And just to touch on a point you said earlier, John, about who's paying the bills, the critics or the audience. And you kind of nailed that one because the audience liked this movie and they've kind of liked every movie in the series. So
Mm-hmm.
this one was sitting at a 74. Silence of the Lambs was a 95, so very similar to the 96 that
Mm-hmm.
the critics said. And then Hannibal was at a 62, which is quite the contrast again with the 39 that the critics gave it. So you're absolutely right. Even though the critics didn't love that sequel to Hannibal, the audience still did,
Mm-hmm.
and so that might be a big reason why they made this prequel. And it also knocked it out of the park at the box office. This was made with a budget of about 78 million and brought in over 209 million
Oh,
for a
for
big
sure.
box office score. Again, considering that this came out in 2002,
Mm-hmm.
so those are 2002 dollars. So that's quite a big hit.
Yeah, for sure.
And for anyone who hasn't seen this film, or maybe you're like me and you haven't seen it for 18 years since it was in theaters, it's worth the watch again. Amazon Prime is where you can watch it right now, and I would highly encourage anyone that, again, even if this wasn't your favorite one in the series, and it likely won't be for many people, it'd be hard for me to imagine anyone would rank Silence of the Lambs below another one in this series. But I would definitely say it's worth the watch.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you like these characters, if you like Hannibal especially, like this is worth the watch. Obviously, like I said, I don't like how some of the stuff they did with Hannibal. I don't think it would in line with his character, but it's very minuscule. Those steps out of the lines, right? So, um, it didn't take me out of the movie. It didn't make me go, oh man, I didn't do any of that stuff. So it was it's a fun movie to watch. If you like suspense and you like scary and you just like really smart,
Good acting.
yeah, great acting, right? Because the people that are in
Yeah.
this are awesome. So, uh, yeah, I'd say that I'd say you should watch this for sure.
So it's definite recommend from both of us here. Check this one out. Go back and watch the entire series while you're at it. Anything else to add on this one, buddy?
Nope.
All right, folks, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out our Facebook page, and follow us on both Twitter and Instagram at Damn Movies. We want to hear what you thought of today's podcast and any suggestions you have, especially in terms of what movies you'd like us to discuss next. Send us an email to moviesthedamned@gmail.com. Please also check out John's full-length novels. His first two novels, Dollhouse and The Tracker, are Amazon bestsellers. And you can also order his novella Balance, his book of short stories, Four Shots of Horror, and his newest novel, Off the Grid, all available right now on Amazon. For further details on John's other published works, please visit his blog, johnhuntfiction.wordpress.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
That's right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, social distancing, and all that, and be kind to everyone.